Alright, hello everyone, it's Jacob with another update for the Shader Soccer project going on at the HobbyGameDev subreddit right now. Fairly short update this week in terms of what's actually available in the game, but pretty important. So I actually finally have the configuration GUI stuff for the shaders for both teams actually fully hooked up and working now. So you have your shader, which you can select here, and then you can basically change the colors or potentially other options, but right now there's just colors. So you can select solid color over here or like diffuse, a diffuse shader. And then once that's done, you can click the Start Game button, which will basically propagate the shaders to the individual teams. And then so now you can have a little bit more colorful gameplay. So that's really it for this week. I'm probably going to spend the rest of the video talking a little bit more about how all this is hooked up with the code. So if you're not really interested in that type of thing, feel free to, stop listening and watching now. So anyway, as for how this is all hooked up, the kind of boxes you see on each side are team configuration panels, and there's a script for that. And those basically just handle some initialization logic to make sure the default shader is loaded once the scene is loaded. And then they also kind of allow me to easily expose whatever kind of properties of the shader that I want to expose, and later ultimately pass to the gameplay scene when the Start Game button is clicked. Within the team kind of configuration panel, there's the shader selector toggles here, and then there's the shader configuration panel, which kind of can encapsulate all of the options for whatever shader is picked. So if you have the solid color, it'll have a child object, which has the solid color configuration options, and if you select diffuse, then it'll have a child object that has the diffuse shader configuration options. And there is a shader configuration panel script for that, which has a reference to that example game object, which is these cubes here that allows kind of the color to be updated in real time as it changes. There's a reference for the object for the current shader configuration GUI, which if you have diffuse shaded, that's kind of this stuff here for the diffuse thing. And then if you do solid, then it's the GUI stuff for configuring the solid color shader. And those are basically created in the code from these different prefabs, which just hold the GUI components for an individual type of shader. So now when the toggle buttons are clicked, I have them hooked up via the inspector to call these other functions to display the configuration options for a particular shader. So if the solid color one is clicked, then it will call this function here to display that configuration stuff. It'll make sure that the shader was actually toggled on and not off. It'll destroy whatever configuration GUI stuff is already here, and then it will basically just initialize the new shader configuration GUI stuff for whatever shader was selected, which in this instance would be from the solid color shader config GUI prefab. So each of the prefabs for the GUI configuration options has its own script. Right now they're pretty similar just because the shaders are similar. They only have that one color. But each of these kind of individual shader configuration GUI scripts have a reference to the actual material that has the shader in it. They have the color selector GUI thing, and then they also have knowledge about the example game object. And the initialization effectively kind of just initializes the game object example game object to have whatever default colors are selected here. And it also adds this event listener so that anytime any one of the values in the color selector gets changed, the entire configuration GUI will get a callback which will allow it to update the color for the example game object. And that is basically it for how the configuration option GUI things themselves work. You may notice I removed the alpha component selector from last week, and that's just because it's not really being used at all in any of the current shaders, and I'm not sure I'll get to a shader with the time remaining for this project that will actually have a use for it, so I've just disabled it for now. So after you've kind of gone and configured your different shader options and you click the Start Game button, what happens is I've kind of exposed properties all the way from this individual shader configuration panel to propagate the material with the shader configuration options all the way to this gameplay scene, which is kind of done via this create material method, which creates a copy of the underlying material, which is done just to make sure I don't modify that material in other places within the game, because that's the same material asset that would theoretically get modified if you don't create a copy. And this create material method is actually overriding a method in this abstract material configuration class, which basically is just like an interface in C#, but I made it an abstract class inheriting from mono behavior, so that I could do something pretty simple. And yeah, here it is in the shader configuration panel, which switches out which configuration options are shown. I basically had it inherit from mono behavior, so I could call get component on the material configuration from whatever the current shader configuration GUI happens to have, and then ultimately get the material there. So that's all that happens there. And once that's done, that ultimately propagates up through this method in the team configuration panel, which these panels are known about by the game setup start button. So that finds that, it gets the material and assigns it to a static variable in the team factory classes, which are just used to propagate the materials between the scenes so that they don't get destroyed. So that's it for this week. Next week I'll probably be working on getting a specular highlight shader of some kind add into the game, which I didn't quite get to by the time for this update. And then I'll may start working on adding in some different models to be selectable from for the players on each team, since some people have expressed interest in contributing in that area. And if there's any time left, then I may just do some minor polish stuff, just depending on whatever I feel like. So that's it for this week, and we'll see you next time.